Yeah, maybe a few facts here. If we speak about the dependency on gas regarding Azerbaijan, I mean, we had a dependency of 2%. So 2% of the gas imports originally came from Azerbaijan. After the handshake of Ursula von der Leyen last year in July, and she called him a trustworthy partner, I think this is absolutely regrettable. But then, or with this new contract, this should increase to 3%. So I don't think this so-called dependency should be a reason for not condemning it and not even going further, as we did today with our resolution, to also put sanctions on individuals in Azerbaijan. Second point, I think it's important that for the time being, Russia was a so-called peacekeeping force in the region for Armenia. But since Nicole Pashinyan...
We saw a dispatch, by the way, today, Viola, saying that they're dismantling their peackeeping checkpoints in Nagorno-Karabakh.
I just want to say, I mean, the whole move by Azerbaijan was only possible because Russia did not interfere and let Armenia complete on its own. And of course, that looks very much like a punishment because this freely elected prime minister was not from the pro-Russian party, as most of the other prime ministers have been before. And that is the tragic thing here. And there was the momentum for the European Union to come finally into the game, but we came too late. We were not, I would say, forceful enough. We still have the EU mission on the ground. We will extend this. There's no question. Charles Michel got active as a mediator. But then Aliyev, behind our back, betrayed us and not occupied, but I mean, it's the territory of Azerbaijan, there's no question. But of course, it would have been possible to mediate this in a civilized manner and to really give security guarantees to the people in Nagorno-Karabakh. And what we see now with the rejection of Azerbaijan not traveling to Grenada, that is a clear blackmailing now. And we need to make sure that we get this back on track, that we see that the security of the people in Armenia is guaranteed and there is not any further military attack, because people in Armenia are terribly scared now, while we see that the superiority of Azerbaijan would allow them to go through this corridor and to make sure he gets this stride to Nakhichevan.
Okay, so we talked about Ukraine, we've talked about the South Caucasus, and then there's the recent flare-up, less reported on, between Kosovo and Serbia, where the U.S. warned of a sudden doubling of Serbia's forces at the border after a deadly shootout last month left 4 dead. Now, Belgrade has since de-escalated in the last week.
7 difficult days are behind us, maybe the most difficult days in the last 15 years. Difficult because of the events in Kosovo and Metohija, but also because of the extensive campaign against our country, Serbia. Campaign of lies. Campaign of untruths.
The lies, according to Serbia's president, are coming from the United States, when it stated that Serbia had doubled the number of troops at its border. Now, there was no Alexander Vucic at Thursday's summit in Spain. He stayed away, sending a junior delegation. For its part, Kosovo, represented in Grenada by its head of state, who holds a largely ceremonial role. However, she came bearing blunt messages.
There's no reason to meet before sanctions are adopted towards Vucic. Sanctions first, and then we can talk about the rest.
Okay, so fortunately, this hasn't escalated further, David Amiel, but it's kind of adding up, isn't it? Ukraine, the South Caucasus, and now Kosovo and Serbia. And again, the question is the EU prepared to take on all the challenges that are at its doorsteps?
Yeah, and you could even add the situation in Bosnia, which is also a huge concern, I think, for all of us. What we're saying in the former Yugoslavia countries is something similar to what we're saying also in the South Caucasus and the former USSR republics, that is unresolved conflict since the 1990s. And there was a strange habit in the European Union, especially in the 2010s, not to have a close look on what was happening right at its borders in Yugoslavia, in Ukraine, in the South Caucasus. And I think that this strategic mistake is starting to be corrected. And actually, this intuition was at the heart of the idea of the European political community. Obviously, there are reflections on the enlargement of the European Union. But before that, we need to have a space of political discussion, of political conversation, of tackling this conflict at the border of the European Union. And it's a forum we didn't have. And I think it's a good news that we start to have this. Obviously, it's not an answer to these conflicts, but it's a way of starting to addressing them.
Of course, for a long time, you had kind of a cold peace in a lot of these places. It's flaring up more of late in the Balkans, in the former Yugoslavia.
I don't know if we can call that peace. And yeah, we are about to have a war.
We're about to have a war?
Well, I mean, if the hardliners in Kosovo continue to push on the Serbian and their ministers, they won't accept to be kicked out of Kosovo. That's it. It's simple as that, and no government in Belgrade can accept that. So at the end, the massing of troops and the removing troops and putting back troops, at the end, it will end out with someone who will shoot someone, and then you will have a new war. It's very explosive. And plus, we have a moral issue. I'm sorry for those who like Europe. It's Europe who support Kosovo here. And we have also a moral issue because yesterday, President Volodymyr Zelensky expressed his gratitude to President Aliyev. And it's also hand-tied. He's just receiving support from Aliyev and especially from
It's not just politics. He spoke on the telephone to Aliyev
yeah.
because today he met with Nicole Pashinyan. He met with both sides.
Yeah, but he expressed yesterday gratitude to the support of Aliyev to the war. And anyway, just now he's receiving machine guns, military wearing from Turkey and different kind of weaponry, plus support on drones. And he will not support Armenia if Erdogan asks.
Bernard de Montferrand, you talked earlier about the unresolved issues of the 1990s when it comes to former Soviet states. We're seeing it as well, again, with the Balkans. why is it all coming to a head now? Why are we back to this period of the same kind of instability we saw just after the fall of the Berlin Wall?
First reaction, the linkage between all those different crises, it's a question of timing. Of course, everybody being busy in Ukraine, there's a temptation to use that. Is it exactly coordinated? I'm not sure. I think it would be wrong to think of a sort of plot. It's more important to take each of those problems to try to deal with them.
There's not necessarily a grand scheme.
Kosovo is a sort of impossible problem to solve. And this is why in 1999 there was this clash with bombing from NATO on Serbia, with a breach in some way of our principles, because we were used to respect the borders.
Territorial integrity.
And in that case, the behavior of all participants proved that it was not possible. So after unbelievable debates, there was the independence of Kosovo, with, at that time, a strong military presence, an international presence of NATO. And the idea was to say, we are going to cool the situation. But the second leg of the solution was to have an enormous action in the field of respect of minorities. In the northern part of Kosovo, 90% of the people in some commune or in some districts are Serbians. If you don't respect absolutely the identity of those people, the language, the custom, and so it can burst in a few minutes. So today, what is the solution? The solution is to maintain a strong presence, international presence. The British have decided within the presence of NATO to increase their forces to stabilize. Second action is to be extremely active with Serbia, who has very strong interest in this field. It's so sensitive in the Serbian history, in the Serbian psyche to Kosovo. We have to be much more active than we have been in the past, and maybe using our ties, the action of the European Union in terms of trade, in terms of, on all the aspects of the relations, to bring Serbia to a more cooperative attitude.
Right. Earlier.
Completely. We have to remind that on the Serbian side, there is a very bad memory, is Operation Tempest, 1995. Operation Tempest is the only one successful ethnic cleansing in the Yugoslavian wars. It's the government of Croatia, supported by NATO, who pushed out from Krajina, you will see the Krajina, 300,000 Serbians who were pushed to Serbia. So what they remind from us is that we did that in Krajina, why not in Kosovo? So that's why they will put armies if they feel the pressure.
Very, very briefly on this, Viola van Kramen, because it's so complicated. This Spain, the hosts of the summit in Granada, they don't officially recognize Kosovo as an independent state. And you heard Ambassador de Montferrand saying it's intractable. Is this one of those conflicts that there's really not much the EU can do about?
Well, for quite some time, and since I'm the standing rapporteur for Kosovo and the shadow rapporteur for Serbia, I deal a lot with both of the countries. And honestly, I had hoped that the resumption of the dialogue starting 2.5 years ago would be swifter, more successful, and we could have seen already some of the efforts and some of the successes until now. Unfortunately, I have to say, I mean, the events and the terrible attack on the Kosovo police on the 24th of September, I think, show clearly that the north of Kosovo is a very, let's say, special region, and we really have to make sure we get the facts right. I do respect, Ambassador, the situation that you said we have to deal with in Serbia, but on the other hand, we have to also demand from Serbia a proper investigation, really make sure that there can't be 30 heavy armed people in the north on the parallel structure, in a parallel system, which are not controlled neither obviously by Belgrade nor by the government of Kosovo. And I do hope that we can manage for the next weeks and months to come up with a new agreement with a statutory on the Association for the Serb Municipalities to make sure before the next election in Europe, before the US election, we have a proper solution and then a sequencing to which both sides can agree on. As everyone has mentioned here, I don't think that both countries are ready or willing to go for a big war, but this continuously instability, the continuously provocation is definitely a threat, and pay for it to be enforced is important, but nevertheless, we need also stability. We need the prosperity for the people on the ground. Otherwise, and you will see this, people will leave their countries even more. They have migrated already to a large extent, and we have to make sure we get this enlargement implementation. What I see in France is a big step forward, and I do hope we can work on this together even more than in the past.
Right, and you need a strong voice to be able to mediate in sensitive places. So you have these 47 nations at the summit in Granada. Otherwise put, it's actually 27 plus 20, the EU 27. And some of the countries that you see in yellow on this map have never and will never apply for EU membership. One left, we know which one that is. Others have been knocking on the door for years. And the European political community is kind of a way of, I guess, starting to have these concentric circles, since we still have this unanimity rule, which is difficult to manage, David, among 27. You have all these candidates. And by the way, Serbia is one of those, which is still a candidate to join the European Union. Can we have this sort of, is this the embryo to a bigger European Union, what we're seeing with this meeting in Granada, or is it simply just a way to manage the neighborhood?
I would say both in a way, because the European political community, as we are saying in Grenada, is a way, as you said, to manage the neighborhood. That is to have a political space of discussion between the European Union and its immediate neighbors. But on the other hand, we also have a strong support among many, many countries in the European Union to have a renewed process of enlargement. That does not include all the yellow countries that you have on your map, but it includes some. And I think that what you were saying in your question is very important. We can consider enlargement if there is a deep reform of the way that the EU functions, especially on the issues you mentioned. That is unanimity rule, for instance. It cannot function if the EU is much wider than it is today, and it already causes a lot of difficulties, for instance, in tax issues and things like that. And that's also the reason why France and Germany, you were talking about the tensions that you can have between these two countries, but France and Germany mandated a group of 12 experts to make some recommendations on the way to reform the EU, the way the EU functions, and it includes this idea of having much less unanimity rule.
Yeah, but will the French and the Germans agree with each other? Emmanuel Macron, because this discussion's been one about security since we began the hour. And Emmanuel Macron, he made this call for strategic autonomy. That would require a strong commitment from Germany. In an interview with the Guardian newspaper earlier this week, the chair of the European Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee, who hails from the opposition Christian Democrats, blasted that lack of chemistry between Emmanuel Macron and Olaf Scholz. The most prominent example is that once again, we're not moving forward on the development of the European battle tank, said David McAllister. How is that Franco-German couple when you think back to when you were at the Chancellery in Berlin, Ambassador?
If you have looked at the history between Germany and France in the last 100 years, it showed that natural agreement is not always the rule between France and Germany. The relations between France and Germany have always been very difficult. We are extremely different. That doesn't mean that we cannot do a lot of things together, and what we have done in the last 60 years is unbelievable.
But you heard David Damiel saying this is a crucial moment when the national security of Europe's at stake. And if
we want to succeed, first, keep the line, the strategic direction. Second, to have a dialogue of every day, to know that the Germans, if the Germans have a different position, France on the problem of tanks, for instance, is that it's an industrial problem, mainly, because their own companies are fighting together. How can we find an agreement which takes into account the industrial interests of German firms and French firms, and at a certain moment, Scholz and Macron have to say, sorry, my dear friends.
Are you surprised at this lack of personal chemistry between the two? I mean, these are the kinds of issues they both like.
I can tell you the personal interference between Merkel and Sarkozy at the beginning was very strange.
Very strange.
Chirac and Schröder at the beginning, it was also extremely distant, and they wouldn't understand each other very well. I don't believe the personal relationship can help, but the main problem are interests.
Well, there's certainly a problem, because to revive the old flame, Emmanuel Macron is traveling for 2 days next week to Hamburg, the city where Olaf Scholz was once mayor. According to the French presidency, it will be a, quote, retreat with no final statement nor immediate announcement. The idea to think about topics that go beyond the handling of everyday current business. Viola von Krammen, the two leaders need a retreat in Hamburg. What does that tell you?
I would say we had better times when it comes to the German Franco motor or the engine, when we think of Schmidt and Giscard d'Estaing and others. But I think it's a good, let's say, a good positive signal that your president, Macron, will come to Hamburg and that will at least seek for this new spirit, what we definitely need. But I would say what we should not forget is that the bigger EU needs maybe more a Weimar triangle and to the inclusion of the smaller states, not so much to focus too much on the French-German couple. I think this is important, yes, but it should not too much depend on the personal relationship of the president and the chancellor, but rather on the institution. So I'm a bit concerned when I hear that, for example, in German schools, you hardly find any students who would like to become a member of the exchange to France and vice versa. Germany closes down Goethe institutes in France and so on. And that, I think, worries me much more. So institutions which were designed and established for the bilateral cooperation are rather shrinking than increasing. And that is, I think, our core problem. Yes, the personal relationship is important, but it's more about the institutions, I would say.
So the future of Europe depends more on all its players, or more on that Franco-German motor?
I would say I don't care. I fight for sovereignty. The relation between France and Germany I liked was the one between Adenauer and Charles de Gaulle when they signed the Treaty of the Élysée in '63. That was shut down, by the way, by the Bundestag to put back United States, NATO, and the GATT. De Gaulle requested not to have it, and Adenauer was agreed with that. So we are, and many French, I think, for this kind of Europe, the Europe of nations, and not a Europe of a thing that's the decide thing for everybody. So I don't know if we are. It's just in France that our leaders are speaking about relation, the couple franco-allemand, the Franco-German German couple. In Germany, they're speaking of partnership. They're not buying our Rafale planes. They're buying the F-35. They're fighting every day they can against EDF. They want to destroy EDF because it's our sovereignty, because we have nuclear power plants, and Germany doesn't want that we have this cheap energy. So I don't see very French-friendly relations.
Let's not forget all the areas where we made historic progress in the recent years. Immigration, we reached a landmark agreement yesterday on the pooling of fiscal resources. We made a landmark achievement during the COVID crisis, and everyone thought it was impossible. But yes, there are areas where there are tough negotiations, for instance, on defense industry, for instance, on energy. With negotiations go tensions. It's the usual way of doing things, but I think we can make progress on that in the following weeks.
Daniel, I want to thank you very much. I want to thank as well Georges Kuzmanovic, Bernard de Montferrand, Viola van Krammen for being with us from Strasbourg. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 today.
In the Kremlin, an important guest has arrived. The supreme leader of a rising superpower, here to see an angry Tsar at war. Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin showing the world that China and Russia are together. Their militaries work together. Their economies work together. Their diplomats work together. And despite Russia's war on Ukraine and all the turmoil that it's causing, China is doubling down on this relationship. Check out what Xi said to Putin as he left the Kremlin, speaking through his translator. A year after Putin went to war, this sounded like two men on a mission to reshape the world. But what is that mission, and what does it mean for the rest of us? In part one of this video, we'll explore how China and Russia have become so closely intertwined.
This is just a natural match made in heaven.
70% of China energy depends on import, and Russia can really help in a big way on those imports.
Chinese military has benefited tremendously from Russian military import.
In part two, we examine the mission that's binding them even closer together.
Xi Jinping really views Vladimir Putin as a crucial partner in weakening the United States.
Russia is a very useful and important asset and partner in this long-term struggle. It's increasingly the emperor and the Tsar.
Both China and Russia felt a lot of similar sentiment that they've been forced by the US to stick together.
And in part three, we'll look to the future. And wherever we look, we see the specter of conflict. For the American-led Western powers,
China and Russia could combine their war plans and create an extremely effective force for targeting the United States.
The question is whether we have to plan, in the event that we had a war with China, that China and Russia would be working together.
For the rising power of India, friend of Russia but threatened by China, and growing acutely aware of the dangers.
The realities of conventional war, it's not something of the past. It can still happen. That is something we need to be preparing for now.
And we explore the implications for the Ukraine war. The stakes are high for everyone, and the endgame is very far from clear.
Imagine that Russia does a large exercise or escalates in Ukraine at the time where China wants to make a move on Taiwan. I think that would put a lot of US defense planners into a tough spot.
The whole mankind is at the crossroad. War or peace, we end up going back to the Stone Age and very, very dangerous.
One thing that's striking right now is just how many leaders say that we're approaching a decisive time in the world. Xi Jinping calls it a crossroads. Joe Biden talks about an inflection point. Here in Germany, Olaf Scholz calls it a watershed moment. But whichever term you use, it's a time fraught with danger. And central to what happens next is the relationship between China and Russia. War games in Russia's Far East. The Vostok exercises bring together a host of Russia's friends. Chief among the guests is China. This is just the latest in a run of drills between Russia and China and other partners that's intensifying year by year. From the Middle East together with Iran, to the far south of the Indian Ocean together with South Africa, and even going beyond the scope of exercises to bring Russian and Chinese operations closer together.
In recent years, we have also done some what we call a joint patrol, be it in air or be it at sea. So this kind of joint patrol are not exercises; they're just kind of joint operations.
Operations that have made their neighbors wary around the Sea of Japan. On multiple occasions, US allies Japan and South Korea have scrambled jets in response and published detailed charts of naval and air force movements to show that they are on alert. The joint patrols are part of a wide-ranging roadmap for military cooperation signed by Russia and China's defense ministers. A further deepening of a relationship that goes back a long way.
Chinese military has benefited tremendously from Russian military import ever since the 1990s.
Zhou Bo is a retired senior colonel of the Chinese military, the PLA.
So today, Chinese military is growing with strength, but without Russia's assistance, for decades and our own efforts, probably the Chinese military would not be as strong as it is today.
Relations between the two sides ruptured during the Cold War over ideology and territory. They even came to open conflict along their eastern border. US President Richard Nixon exploited these tensions to build ties with Beijing in the 1970s. But as the Soviet Union veered towards collapse, an opening came.
In the 80s, when pragmatic leadership arrived in Moscow and Beijing, they decided that sorting out this territorial dispute, not investing a lot of resources and money into this potential confrontation between two nuclear powers, but focusing elsewhere, is worth it. And that's where the foundation for the relationship was built.
Alexander Gabuyev is a Russian expert on China based in Berlin.
After collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia emerged as the major provider of military hardware to China. China was under sanctions following the Tiananmen massacre.